Okay, let's really dive in here. You've brought us some fascinating source material today. Insights drawn from a really significant dialogue session recently convened by Eritrea's Ministry of Justice.
That's right. And the title of this gathering, it immediately signals its ambition. Justice, development, and geopolitics of the Horn. It tells you they weren't just looking at one piece of the puzzle.
Right.
They were trying to connect these vast, complex areas. How laws and justice systems intersect with national development goals, and how both of those are shaped by and can shape the intricate geopolitical forces at play in the Horn of Africa.
Absolutely. Our mission in this deep dive, then, is to unpack the key discussions, the insights, the perspectives that emerged from this important session. We're taking the material you've shared and, extracting the most important nuggets of knowledge, focusing specifically on that complicated, often challenging link between legal frameworks, the push for national development, and the dynamic, sometimes turbulent, geopolitics of the region.
It's really about understanding how countries in the Horn are contemplating their future, how they're thinking about building stable, prosperous societies, and crucially, how they plan to do that while navigating a global landscape that is constantly shifting and, let's face it, often presents significant external pressures.
Hmm. And what's particularly valuable about this source, I think, is that it's not some dry academic paper, is it? It draws directly on the perspectives shared in the room by legal experts, scholars, practitioners, people brought together specifically for this focused conversation.
Exactly. So we're getting a real sense of the crucial questions and the perceived vital strategies from people actively engaged in these fields.
It gives us a window, maybe, into the thinking behind policy considerations and regional approaches, highlighting what the participants felt were the most pressing issues and potential ways forward.
That's it. It gives us that insight.
So let's start by setting the scene a bit. What was this dialogue session all about? When and where did it happen? And what were its stated goals?
Okay, so this significant dialogue session took place from September 4th to 6th, 2024. And yes, it was convened by the Ministry of Justice in Eritrea. According to the source material we have, the core aims were quite ambitious, really addressing both internal foundations and external realities.
Okay, let's dig into those aims a little more then. What were they specifically trying to achieve?
Well, the first core aim articulated was to further integrate what are described as Eritrean core social values into the nation's legal framework. This is really about ensuring that the laws governing the society are deeply rooted in the values and, the cultural context of the Eritrean people.
Right, making the law feel authentic, grounded.
Exactly. And the second aim was to directly address the region's complex geopolitical dynamics.
So on one hand, looking inward at societal values, kind of the bedrock, and on the other, looking outward at the global and regional power plays. And the report suggests these two things are intrinsically linked.
Precisely. The source emphasizes that achieving these two aims simultaneously is seen as vital for promoting both peace and sustainable development in the Horn region. The underlying logic, it seems, is that you cannot build a truly sustainable and peaceful future without a legal and developmental framework that is both internally legitimate, grounded in societal values, and externally aware, capable of navigating that volatile geopolitical environment.
That makes a lot of sense when you put it like that. A
Mm.
strong internal foundation makes you more resilient externally, maybe. And navigating external forces effectively gives you the stability you need to build internally.
Mm.
The report also mentions the caliber and diversity of the attendees.
It does. It apparently brought together legal experts, scholars, and practitioners from various countries, and the source highlights that this diverse mix was quite intentional, intended to foster a rich exchange of ideas, which, when you're tackling issues as multifaceted as justice, development, and geopolitics, getting perspectives from different backgrounds and national contexts is pretty essential for a comprehensive view.
Yeah, you need those different angles. It sounds like they were deliberately trying to avoid an insular discussion then. And the source quotes Professor Fawaz Gerges, who seemed to view this session as particularly noteworthy.
Yes, Professor Gerges is quoted, calling the session highly significant. He points to the diverse group assembled scholars, experts, special guests, and their focused discussion on identifying and exploring, quote, effective strategies for promoting justice, development, peace, and security in the Horn of Africa. That phrase, effective strategies here is key, I think.
Suggests they weren't just analyzing problems.
Right, they were actively seeking actionable solutions, ways forward.
And Gerges lays out the breadth of the agenda, doesn't he? Listing themes like the geopolitical context, potential reforms, enhancing regional relations, the critical role of law and justice in driving development, and specifically addressing core values. It sounds like it really covered the waterfront.
It was clearly designed to be a holistic discussion. I mean, you can't really talk about development or justice in isolation from the geopolitical realities that shape the region, can you? Nor can you build lasting structures without considering the foundational values of the society.
Makes sense. And another prominent voice mentioned in the source is Professor Makane Mbengue. What was his take on the dialogue?
Professor Mbengue assessed the dialogue as instrumental in addressing the broader geopolitical landscape, and he particularly emphasized its historical context. This connection to history is something that comes up again later, actually. It seems quite important.
Okay, so Mbengue also links the session directly to navigating the external geopolitical environment. And he mentions this September dialogue wasn't really the starting point. It actually built upon a previous session.
Exactly. He links it back to an earlier session held in April, which had a slightly different, perhaps more inwardly focused aim. That April session was specifically dedicated to identifying core values intended to guide the review of Eritrea's legal framework for sustainable development. He even notes the pivotal role of President Isaias Afwerki in encouraging deep reflection on these core values during that earlier session in April.
So this September dialogue appears to be a deliberate progression then. First, establishing the internal anchors, identifying core values in April, and then in September, expanding the conversation to integrate those internal principles with the external geopolitical environment and the regional dynamics. It sounds like quite a structured approach to tackling these complex interlinked issues.
That's certainly the picture painted by the source material, yeah. It suggests a process of first solidifying the internal philosophical and legal foundation before strategically addressing how that foundation interacts with the external world and regional partners. It really highlights the understanding, I think, that internal strength is necessary for effective external engagement.
Right. Okay, let's really unpack this geopolitical landscape piece now, because it was clearly a major thread running throughout the dialogue. Professor Fawaz Gerges provides a pretty vivid picture of the current global situation and its specific implications for the Horn.
He does. He describes it as a transformative moment in global geopolitics, a period of significant change, and he points out that this has significant implications for Eritrea and its neighbors. His analysis highlights what he sees as the waning traditional dominance of the United States.
Waning dominance, that's quite a strong characterization. What does Gerges argue is the consequence of this shift, particularly for regions like the Horn of Africa?
Well, he argues that this changing global order, where U.S. dominance is perhaps less absolute, paradoxically leads to significant pressure from the U.S. on countries in the, quote, global south. A term often used for developing nations in Asia, Africa, Latin America.
Okay.
This pressure, according to Gerges, is to align with U.S. strategic interests, specifically in the context of its ongoing rivalry with other global powers, like China and Russia.
So the Horn is essentially caught in the crosscurrents of larger power competition. Is that the idea?
That's precisely the challenge Gerges identifies. He calls it a complex environment. Countries in the Horn, like many in the global south, find themselves in a position where major global players are vying for influence, attempting to draw them into their respective orbits or alliances. And this isn't just about economic ties, it's about political and strategic alignment.
And how does Gerges suggest countries in the Horn navigate this complex environment? What's his recommendation?
His core argument and recommendation is that these nations should actively avoid being drawn into these rivalries.
Yeah.
So instead of picking a side or becoming overly dependent on a single external power, he advises them to engage with all parties. It's a kind of multi-aligned approach.
Engaging with everyone rather than exclusively aligning with one? That sounds like a strategy to preserve autonomy, maybe?
Exactly. That seems to be the goal. And he couples that with a crucial strategy to diversify their economic and reform strategies. This diversification isn't just about trading with multiple countries. It's about seeking diverse models for development, diverse sources of investment, diverse security partners if needed. Not relying on just one source.
So the old advice, don't put all your eggs in one geopolitical or economic basket.
Precisely. Gerges sees this strategy, engaging broadly in diversifying approaches, as the most effective way for countries in the Horn to navigate this intricate landscape effectively.
Mm.
It's about building resilience and maintaining room to maneuver in what is increasingly a multipolar world. But he doesn't stop there. He also points to internal regional factors that make the external challenge even harder.
But really, what internal factors does he highlight?
He points to what he calls a noticeable lack of coordination and cooperation among countries in the Horn. He argues that this internal fragmentation undermines their collective interests and opens the door for external powers to interfere in their affairs. End quote. In his view, this disunity has directly stifled their ability to function as truly independent sovereign states.
Wow, that's a critical connection. External pressure is much harder to resist if you're divided internally within the region itself.
That's the argument he makes, yes. He sees the critical challenge for these nations as figuring out how to escape this geopolitical quagmire, assert their sovereignty, and collaborate effectively to become influential actors on the international stage. He really stresses that they must confront their internal differences, foster collaboration, build bridges, promote economic integration among themselves, and actively incorporate principles of regional cooperation into their national policies.
That phrase, geopolitical quagmire, really paints a picture of the difficulty, doesn't it? It's not just a complex situation. It's one they are seemingly stuck in and need to actively work to escape through internal and regional effort.
Yeah, it's a strong image.
And as we noted earlier, Professor Mbengue also highlighted that the dialogue was instrumental in addressing the broader geopolitical landscape, particularly looking at its historical context. So it seems both experts saw understanding and actively navigating these external forces as absolutely central to any discussion about the future of justice and development in the region.
It definitely wasn't treated as some peripheral issue. The source indicates a clear recognition that the external environment fundamentally impacts internal possibilities.
Great.
I mean, you can design the most perfect legal system or development plan on paper, but if you can't manage the external pressures, it's likely to be constantly undermined.
Right.
Conversely, building regional unity and strength is seen as a way to gain agency, to gain leverage in the face of those pressures.
Okay, let's pivot now from the external environment to the internal foundation that was also a major focus, particularly picking up from that earlier April session we mentioned. This is where the concept of grounding the legal framework in core societal values comes in. Professor Makane Mbengue had some key insights here, didn't he?
Yes, Professor Mbengue really emphasized the profound importance of identifying and integrating these core values into the legal system. He stated that the focus in the April session, and carrying over into this one, was on identifying these specific values for greater alignment and integration into the ongoing legal consolidation process. The explicit goal, he said, was to ensure the long-term sustainability of the legal framework.
So the idea is that the laws aren't just rules on paper. They need to be built on something enduring, something that resonates deeply with the society they govern to actually last and be effective.
Precisely. And he makes a very powerful argument here. A legal framework that lacks a solid foundation of values is inherently vulnerable. It's susceptible to being easily challenged, disregarded, or maybe failing to adapt because it doesn't have deep roots in the societal consciousness. He goes further to say that this specific challenge of legal systems lacking a solid value foundation is, quote, evident in many African nations, suggesting this is perhaps a broader post-colonial or developmental challenge.
That's a significant observation. It implies that maybe legal systems might have been inherited or adopted without being fully integrated with the specific cultural and historical context of the nation, leaving them less stable or perhaps less legitimate in the eyes of the people.
That's the potential interpretation, yes. And Mbengue lists the specific fundamental values that were identified as critical in their discussions for the Eritrean context. These are national sovereignty, the rule of law, human dignity, social justice, and self-reliance.
Those are weighty concepts. Let's just touch on a couple of those as legal foundations. National sovereignty, for instance, what does that mean in this context as a legal value?
Well, as a legal value, national sovereignty would likely translate into legal principles that assert the nation's supreme authority within its own borders, its right to self-determination, and its independence from external control in legal and political matters. It's foundational, really, to asserting agency in the face of those geopolitical pressures we were just discussing.
Got it. And the rule of law, that's a term used globally, but how might it be particularly emphasized here?
The rule of law is, the principle that everyone, people, institutions, government itself, is accountable to laws that are publicly known equally enforced and independently judged. Here, emphasizing it as a core value likely means a strong commitment to building institutions and legal processes that ensure fairness, predictability, and accountability within Eritrea. It's seen not just as some Western concept, but as a value essential for internal stability and justice, perhaps interpreted through the lens of their own history and societal norms.
Okay, so these values aren't just abstract ideals floating around. What does Mbengue say about how they function practically?
He emphasizes that these identified values are not merely abstract concepts. He sees them as critical to shaping a legal system that is responsive to the realities and aspirations of the Eritrean people. This is the crucial link connecting the values directly to the practical design and application of laws so that the legal system actually serves the specific needs and goals of the society.
So the aim is for the legal system to feel genuinely of the people, reflecting their history, culture, and hopes for the future, rather than feeling like some external imposition.
Exactly. Mbengue states that by anchoring the ongoing legal review process firmly on these specific values, sovereignty, rule of law, human dignity, social justice, self-reliance, the clear aim is to better articulate a framework that genuinely reflects the social, cultural, and historical context of Eritrea. It's about building a legal identity that is authentic and therefore more sustainable because it's rooted in the national fabric.
That makes a lot of sense intellectually. But translating these big ideas, values like social justice or self-reliance into specific legal codes and institutions must be incredibly challenging in practice. Did Mbengue highlight any specific practical difficulties in trying to integrate these core values into a modern legal framework?
Yes, he was quite clear that this process, while absolutely vital, is not without significant hurdles. He specifically highlighted two primary challenges they see in this integration process.
Okay, let's dig into this. What was the first one?
The first challenge he identified is capacity building. He explained that this is absolutely essential to ensure that relevant stakeholders are actively involved in the legal review and consolidation process, and he elaborated on what this means. It involves providing information and opportunity for participation at every level.
Okay, capacity building. Now, for an audience following this, that likely means more than just training judges or lawyers, right? It sounds broader than that.
That's the strong implication from his phrasing, yes. It's about empowering everyone who has a stake, legal professionals, yes, but also administrators, community leaders, perhaps even ordinary citizens, with the knowledge, skills, and resources needed to understand the legal system, participate in discussions about its reform, and effectively interact with it. If the law is meant to reflect societal values, people across society need the capacity to engage with and contribute to shaping it.
Which could involve things like public education campaigns.
Exactly. Or training for local officials, developing accessible legal resources. I mean, it's a massive undertaking.
It really sounds like it. And the second primary challenge you mentioned.
That's inclusiveness. Mbengue stressed that ensuring broad participation is equally important as capacity building, and he described it explicitly as a significant challenge. He stated that achieving genuine inclusiveness requires ongoing dialogue and engagement with all sectors of society.
So, if I'm understanding this right, the two challenges are linked. Capacity building provides the ability for people to participate, and inclusiveness ensures that the range of people participating is wide and representative of the whole society.
Exactly. They are completely intertwined. You need to build the capacity for people to understand and contribute meaningfully, and you need to ensure that the process actually reaches beyond, say, limited elites or specific urban groups to include farmers, women, youth, different ethnic or regional communities, truly all sectors of society. Doing this on a national scale, especially when you're grappling with something as fundamental and frankly abstract as integrating shared values into law, is an immense logistical, social, and political challenge. Acknowledging this difficulty up front, as Mbengue does, suggests they recognize the need for a sustained, deliberate, and resource-intensive effort that goes way beyond just initial consultations.
It really does make you think about the sheer scale of implementation, doesn't it? How do you practically facilitate ongoing dialogue and engagement with all sectors across an entire nation when you're reviewing something as fundamental as the legal code? It requires significant infrastructure, communication networks, and, I suppose, a genuine political commitment to hearing diverse voices.
It's a challenge that many nations face, particularly when attempting deep structural reform or trying to ground modern governance in traditional or national values. Benge's point really highlights that this isn't just some academic exercise. It's a practical test of how a state can genuinely engage its population in shaping its foundational laws.
Okay, let's shift gears now and bring in the perspectives of Professor Mohammed Hassan. He brought in the crucial dimensions of history, regional alignment, and Eritrea's specific role in all this.
Yes. Professor Hassan focused heavily on the importance of aligning perspectives and strategies among countries in the region. He argues this alignment is, quote, crucial because it allows us to build a foundation based on shared values that are deeply rooted in our historical experiences.
So history isn't just, a record of the past. It's seen as a source of shared identity and values that can provide a foundation for regional unity in the present and future. Is that the idea?
Precisely. He explains that actively acknowledging and engaging with a shared past helps the region do two vital things. First, it helps them confront and rectify imported values. These might be values or systems imposed during colonial times or introduced through external influence later on, things that don't necessarily align with the region's own heritage.
Values that might be fundamentally at odds with those core national values like sovereignty or self-reliance that Professor Mbengue was talking about.
Potentially, yes, that could be part of it. And second, he says engaging with shared history helps confront and rectify misrepresented narratives.
Yeah.
These could be historical interpretations or stories that have been deliberately or maybe accidentally distorted, perhaps by external actors, perhaps due to internal divisions, and which can otherwise serve to divide the region.
Right.
By confronting these misrepresented narratives together, the idea is they can find a more accurate and, crucially, a more unified understanding of their shared past.
That's a powerful point. Sometimes divisions within a region are fueled precisely by historical misunderstandings or, narratives introduced specifically to keep countries apart. Looking honestly at a shared history can reveal commonalities and shared values that might have been obscured over time.
That's Hassan's core argument. He sees this shared understanding of historical developments as providing a necessary framework for addressing contemporary dynamics. By discussing history openly, they can identify patterns, recurring issues, and points of friction that have historically caused conflict within the Horn.
And by identifying those historical conflict points, they can presumably develop strategies to avoid repeating those same patterns today.
That's the constructive aim, yes.
Yeah.
The overall goal of this historical understanding and the resulting alignment, according to Professor Hassan, is working collaboratively towards a more integrated future. This process, he believes, fosters a sense of unity that he sees as absolutely vital for navigating the complex geopolitical landscape. So it brings us full circle back to Professor Gerges' points about external pressures and the need for resilience.
Right. So building internal strength based on values within nations and building regional unity based on shared history and values among nations, these are presented as interdependent strategies. Two sides of the same coin, really, for asserting sovereignty and pursuing independent development in a challenging global environment.
Exactly. They're portrayed as deeply interconnected. You need both internal cohesion and regional solidarity to effectively manage those external forces and pursue a genuinely self-determined path.
Professor Hassan also specifically addressed Eritrea's role within these regional dynamics. How does he describe its current position?
He describes Eritrea as having emerged as a pivotal player in the region. And he attributes this not just to circumstance, but to a proactive stance that he believes reflects a clear vision for a unified Horn of Africa that resists foreign manipulation.
That characterization is very specific, proactive, aiming for a unified horn, and specifically resisting foreign manipulation. That's quite pointed.
It is. And he highlights what he sees as Eritrea's transformation. In his view, it has moved from being, quote, a victim of geopolitical struggles, perhaps referencing past conflicts or external interference, to becoming a significant regional actor. He sees this shift, this proactive engagement, as vital for achieving shared goals and promoting regional stability across the whole Horn region.
So from his perspective, Eritrea's past experiences, perhaps being negatively impacted by external forces or regional divisions, have informed its current approach. And that approach is now seen as actively working towards a different, more unified regional future, not just for itself, but for the entire Horn.
That's certainly the narrative presented in the source via Professor Hassan's comments, yes. He portrays Eritrea's current role as one actively contributing to broader regional stability and unity, seeing this as the necessary collective approach to push back against external interference and pursue shared, self-determined development goals.
Okay. Given that ambitious vision for a unified Horn resisting external manipulation, did Professor Hassan propose specific, concrete strategies for actually achieving greater cooperation and integration in the region? It's one thing to have the vision.
Yes, he did. He moved beyond the vision and outlined several specific strategies that he believes are crucial for promoting cooperation and ultimately realizing that vision.
Great. Let's walk through those strategies and the purpose he attributed to each one according to the source.
Okay. First, he suggested enhancing regional organizations. The purpose of strengthening existing regional bodies, or potentially creating new ones, is quite clear: to create platforms for dialogue and cooperation.
And what's the intended benefit of having these strengthened platforms? Why is that important?
He argues that strengthening these organizations allows countries in the Horn to prioritize their collective interests over external agendas. It provides, institutional weight and a dedicated space for regional issues to be discussed and addressed internally, reducing the reliance on external mediators or forums where regional interests might be secondary or even overlooked.
Okay, putting regional interests first through regional bodies makes sense. What was the second strategy?
Second was promoting trade and economic partnerships. The primary purpose here is explicitly stated as helping to reduce the region's dependency on external powers, and he suggests this should be done through collaborative projects.
Right. What kind of collaborative economic projects did he mention? Any examples?
He gave examples in key areas like infrastructure, energy, and agriculture. These are sectors where regional cooperation can create significant mutual benefit and build real interconnectedness.
And what benefit does he see coming from these joint economic ventures beyond just the projects themselves?
He states that these collaborative projects can effectively unify our economies, fostering shared prosperity. The underlying idea is that economic interdependence creates a powerful incentive for peace and stability, and it strengthens the region's collective bargaining position on the global stage.
Economic ties as a foundation for peace and leverage. Got it.
What was the third strategy he proposed?
Third was establishing joint security mechanisms. The purpose of this is pretty straightforward: to help the countries in the Horn address common threats that don't respect national borders.
And what examples of common threats did he cite in that context?
He specifically mentioned terrorism and piracy. These are classic examples of transnational threats that really require coordinated action across national lines to be effective. And how does joint security benefit the region overall, in his view?
He argues it builds trust among nations, which is crucial, and significantly enhances overall regional stability. When countries actively work together to protect their shared borders and confront common security challenges, it naturally leads to deeper trust and a more secure environment for everyone, which then supports development.
Okay. The fourth strategy involved cultural connections, I believe.
Yes, that's right. He proposed encouraging cultural exchanges and educational initiatives. The clear purpose here is to strengthen ties among our peoples, going beyond just government-to-government relations to the societal level.
And the benefit of doing that, what does that achieve?
He sees a direct benefit in that this promotes mutual understanding and solidarity. And crucially, he links this back to the earlier point about narratives, stating that these cultural and educational ties can help counteract divisive narratives that might be sowing discord and instead foster a sense of shared destiny among the people of the Horn.
That feels like a really vital layer. State-level cooperation is important, clearly, but building those connections and understanding at the people level creates a much more resilient foundation for unity in the long run. What was the final strategy he mentioned?
The final strategy he discussed was developing a regional diplomatic strategy. The emphasis here is specifically on using dialogue and negotiation as the primary tools for interaction.
Okay, and what's the purpose of having this coordinated regional diplomatic approach?
Its purpose is twofold, really. First, to help mitigate tensions and foster peaceful resolutions to conflicts within the region itself. By having a shared approach to diplomacy, they can address disagreements among themselves constructively. And second, the benefit he sees is significant. By prioritizing regional interests through this common diplomatic strategy, they can effectively present a united front against external pressures.
Ah, okay. So just as Professor Gerges talked about diversifying engagement externally as individual nations, Professor Hassan is saying they need a unified diplomatic approach as a region when dealing with the outside world.
Exactly. It's a proactive assertion of collective agency on the diplomatic stage. And Professor Hassan underscored that for all of these strategies enhancing organizations, promoting trade, establishing security, encouraging cultural ties, developing regional diplomacy, for any of them to be implemented successfully, a clear strategy and policy framework is crucial.
Right. We need a plan.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And he then made the direct point that this is exactly why we are here, referring to the dialogue session itself.
So the session wasn't just a theoretical discussion or a talk shop. It was seen by participants like him as a necessary step to actually formulate the overarching strategy and policy framework needed to put these ideas for regional cooperation into practice.
That's how the source presents his view, yes. It was about translating the understanding of the challenges, the vision for the future, into concrete steps, and ideally, a coordinated plan of action.
And finally, Professor Hassan articulated the ultimate goal that all these initiatives and strategies are working towards. What is that overarching vision for the Horn of Africa, as he laid it out?
His ultimate goal, as stated, is to nurture a unified vision for the Horn of Africa. And this vision, he stresses, is one that explicitly recognizes their shared history and values.
Bringing those foundational elements, the shared history, the shared or perhaps compatible values, back to the forefront as the essential basis for unity.
Yes. And he sees this unified vision not just as an end in itself, but as the essential means for building a foundation for lasting peace, security, and development throughout the region. The ambition is significant: to transform the Horn from a region often characterized by conflict and external vulnerability into a cohesive entity that prioritizes the well-being of its people.
A unified Horn focused internally on the prosperity and security of its own people, built consciously on shared history and values.
That's the powerful ideal he describes. And his closing point is that this commitment to regional unity and collective action, guided by a clear strategy, will ensure a brighter future for all, enabling the region to face its numerous challenges collectively and effectively. It's really a call for deep, integrated cooperation across multiple dimensions: political, economic, security, cultural.
Wow, okay. That's incredibly comprehensive. We've really moved through quite a lot here. We started with the stated purpose and significance of this dialogue session, understanding it as a crucial step following earlier work on internal values. Then we delved deep into the analysis of the shifting global geopolitical landscape and the specific pressures it creates for the Horn. We looked at the critical importance of grounding legal and development frameworks in core national values like sovereignty, rule of law, and self-reliance. We also acknowledged the very real practical challenges of capacity building and inclusiveness in actually implementing that value integration.
Which are huge challenges.
Huge. Then we explored how shared history and Eritrea's changing role are seen as vital for regional alignment, derailed those specific concrete strategies proposed for regional cooperation across economic, security, cultural, and diplomatic spheres, and finally landed on this sweeping vision for a unified, self-determined, and prosperous Horn of Africa.
It really does map out a complex but clearly interconnected path forward, at least from the perspective of the experts who participated in this dialogue. It highlights the interwoven nature of internal resilience, regional solidarity, and strategic external engagement. You seem to need all three working together.
So bringing this back to you, the listener, listening to this deep dive, why is a session like this, based on the source material you provided, so relevant? Well, perhaps you are someone who follows the intricate dynamics of the Horn of Africa closely. Maybe you're fascinated by how nations try to balance the adoption of universal legal principles with the preservation of their unique cultural and historical identity. Or perhaps you track the complex dance of global powers and its impact on strategically important regions around the world. This session, as captured in the source, offers a really valuable window into how experts and practitioners are actively thinking about and strategizing around these exact challenges in a very specific, very vital part of the world. It reveals a deliberate effort, it seems, to define a regional identity and chart an independent course in the face of significant internal and external pressures.
Yeah, it moves beyond just the daily headlines, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It provides a glimpse into the foundational thinking about governance, development, and security from the perspective of those grappling with these issues on the ground, in the region itself.
This deep dive into your source material really reinforces the value, I think, of looking closely at specific reports and dialogues like this one to find those nuanced connections and insights you might miss otherwise. The core takeaway that really resonates from this dialogue session, based on the experts' perspectives presented, is that for the Horn of Africa to truly achieve lasting peace and sustainable development, it seems it must simultaneously engage in a multi-pronged approach,
Right.
looking inward to root its legal and developmental frameworks in core national values, looking outward to strategically and collectively navigate a shifting competitive global order, and crucially, building robust regional unity through concrete strategies of cooperation across various sectors. It's not an either-or situation.
No, it underscores that the challenges are layered, and the proposed solutions have to be equally layered and interconnected. You can't just focus on one piece.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought, perhaps, for you to consider as you continue to follow developments in the region. Given the immense complexities discussed here, the pressures from competing global powers, the significant practical challenges of integrating deep-seated values into modern legal systems, the historical divisions within the region itself, how can countries in the Horn, or indeed any region facing similar pressures in the global south, effectively balance that imperative of fundamental internal reform and value integration with the necessity of pragmatic external engagement and the crucial need for regional cooperation? How do you build from within, unite with your neighbors, and engage with the wider world all at the same time to truly chart your own independent course?
It is perhaps one of the defining challenges for many nations in the 21st century, isn't it? How to manage all those pressures at once.
A profoundly complex question indeed. Thank you for sharing this source material with us and allowing us to take this deep dive today. It's certainly given us and hopefully you a lot to think about.